Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and today we're going to be talking about a really effective way of thinking about and supporting children with behavioral challenges. Many parents and professionals think that rewards and punishments and those kinds of approaches are what's needed when a child is struggling and acting out or exhibiting what we would call inappropriate behaviors. But the reality is that these kids lack some fundamental skills that they need to manage situations and manage life more effectively. And what if, instead of consequences, behavior charts, and those kinds of things, kids need adults to understand the root of their struggles and provide them with these skills, options, solutions to manage their challenges more effectively? That is what we're going to get into with my guest today, Dr. Ross Greene. Reading his book, The Explosive Child, many, many years ago now, totally changed how I thought about behavior, how I thought about supporting my students with behavioral challenges back when I was teaching, well before I was a clinical psychologist. And it was such a different approach than what I had learned in my teacher training and the work that I had done. And his work has helped me in countless ways since, as both a parent and a therapist. So let me tell you a bit more about him. Ross Greene is a clinical psychologist and the New York Times bestselling author of the influential books The Explosive Child, Lost at School, Lost and Found, and Raising Human Beings. He's the originator of the model of care described in those books, now called collaborative and proactive solutions. Dr. Greene was on the faculty at Harvard Medical School for over 20 years and is now founding director of the nonprofit Lives in the Balance, which provides a vast array of free web-based resources on the CPS model. He's appeared in a wide range of media, including The Oprah Show, Good Morning America, The Morning Show, National Public Radio, Mother Jones Magazine, and many more. Dr. Greene lectures and consults widely throughout the world and lives in Portland, Maine. As I said, his work has been so influential for me professionally and personally over the past 20 plus years. I cannot wait to share this with you. Welcome to the show, Dr. Greene.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to start out by just having you share a bit about how you came to be doing this kind of work with kids. Were you always working with kids? Did you have a particular situation that got you thinking about these kinds of things with children? What was the starting point for your journey with all this?
My starting point was that I was a camp counselor, liked working with kids. It was either going to be kids or animals, and I don't like blood, so that leaves me with kids. And I started in graduate school with kids with ADHD. I gravitated to them for whatever reason. If you're working with a lot of kids with ADHD, mostly, quite frankly, because one of the things I noticed with kids with ADHD is that they look very different depending on whether they were on medicine or not. Mm-hmm. And what I had been trained to believe was that challenging behavior was because of passive, permissive, inconsistent, non-contingent, inept parenting. Mm-hmm. But what happened to all that lousy parenting if medicine makes the kid look completely different? Just didn't add up. But if you're working with kids with ADHD, then you're going to be working with a lot of kids who are diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder. And those are the ones who really intrigued me, because it also became very evident that kids who were oppositional and not doing what we wanted them to and being non-compliant, which is the main ingredient, weren't non-compliant full-time. They were only non-compliant part-time, which is when I started calling it part-time oppositional defiant disorder. Otherwise, they were actually quite compliant and were meeting our expectations. And that's fascinating. That's a fascinating thing to hang a disorder on. Can you really have a part-time disorder? And so that's who I began really specializing in. And that's when I discovered that the way I had been trained to work with them, which was, and this is what most folks do still, unfortunately, was to reward the behaviors you like so as to see more of them, and punish the behaviors you don't like so see less of them, and focus exclusively on making the kid comply with adult directives. While that worked for some, it didn't work for a whole bunch more. And that's when I had to start getting a little bit creative and start thinking about what do we really have here? What's going on with this kid, and what maybe should we be doing differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that was my experience too, coming out of my teacher training and going into the classroom. And my first job, I got thrown into a job I was completely unprepared for, but excited about, dealing with middle school age kids with severe emotional and behavioral and learning disorders, which, in your early 20s, you feel like you can conquer the world and do anything. It was actually great because it taught me so much. But what I learned right out of the gate was, oh my goodness, how I have been taught to think about this is not going to work. And that actually is what led me to find your work. But that same experience of, we need some different, not only tools, but some different ways of understanding what's actually going on here, right? So let's get into that, because, where most people think about behavior as kids choosing not to respond or handle things in an appropriate way, right? And therefore, if we just reward enough of this and punish enough of that, they'll make better choices. You really have a different take on that and a different way of conceptualizing what's happening there. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Well, it's the difference between two mentalities. There's kids do well if they can, and there's kids do well if they wanna. Mm-hmm. Kids do well if they wanna basically is the belief that the reason this kid isn't doing well is because the kid doesn't want to do well. Mm-hmm. Therefore, our job as adults is to make the kid want to do well. Now, why wouldn't a kid want to do well? Get this, because doing poorly is working out better for the kid than doing well would, which is putting it in a certain way, but that's actually a fairly popular belief system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How would doing poorly be working out better for the kid than doing well would? He's seeking attention by doing poorly. He's manipulating us. He's coercing us into capitulating to his wishes. He's unmotivated. He's testing limits, right? All things we frequently say about behaviorally challenging kids, in my opinion, none of which are true, but all flowing from a kids do all if they want a mentality and the belief that doing poorly is working out better for the kid than doing well would. On the other hand, kids do well if they can says if this kid could do well, the kid would do well. If the kid's not doing well, something must be getting in the kid's way. Our job, figure out what's getting in the kid's way. Mm-hmm. And that means two things. And this is what I frequently call the information that's been missing, mm-hmm. right? Boy, we don't need to have a meeting to figure out what behaviors the kid is exhibiting mm-hmm. when he's having difficulty meeting our expectations. We already know. We don't need a meeting for that, right? There's a lot of things we talk about in our meetings that we really shouldn't be spending a lot of time talking about because they're not especially productive. Mm-hmm. What do we not spend enough time talking about? The two pieces of information that is frequently missing. What are this kid's lagging skills? Mm-hmm. As you mentioned earlier, this is not about lagging motivation. This is about lagging skills. Mm-hmm. And that's what the research that has accumulated over the last 40 to 50 years has been telling us for a very long time. This is not about lagging motivation. It's about lagging skills. So job one, figure out what skills this kid is lacking so we have the right lenses on. Mm-hmm. Job two, figure out what expectations this kid is having difficulty reliably meeting. See, it's those unmet expectations, or what I refer to as unsolved problems, but those are synonyms, that are causing the challenging behavior that we've been so busy rewarding and punishing. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the deal. Yes, if you reward and punish a kid's behavior, you might make a dent in the behavior, but you will not solve the problem that's causing that behavior. Mm-hmm. But if you're busy solving the problems that are causing the kid's behavior, not only does the kid's behavior improve, the problems get solved. What I refer to frequently as a 2-for-1 sale. All of this, by the way, making clear this crucial difference mm-hmm. between kids do all if they wanna and kids do all if they can.
Mm-hmm. That phrase, kids do well when they can, when I first heard that in your work, probably over 20 years ago now, that is what struck me so much, this idea, well, of course, it seems so obvious when you say it, right? And yet it isn't, because so much of what's taught and how our systems operate both in schools, in, therapies and institutions. Like it is geared around the opposite of that, which is kids do well if they wanna. I mean, that's how my training was, both in the realm of education and in the realm of psychology.
And it's taken a very long time for that to change, but you are absolutely right. A lot of the disciplinary structures in schools, a lot of the assessment structures in school are oriented around behavior and around kids do well if they wanna. Slowly but surely, boy, is this taking a long time to change. Slowly but surely, it is starting to change. But the reality is, in most schools, what do we assess when we're dealing with behaviorally challenging student? Behavior. We do behavior checklists. We do behavior observations. We do a functional behavior assessment, all so that we can come up with a behavior plan, all focused on what I simply refer to as the signal, the fever. Behavior is just the signal. It's the means by which the kid is communicating something very important. We wouldn't want to miss this. I'm stuck. There are expectations I'm having difficulty meeting. That's all behavior is. And yet, generally speaking, you don't get sent to the principal because you're having difficulty completing the double division problems on the worksheet in math. You get sent to the principal if 97 times later, with that problem still unsolved, you push over a desk. Now you're going to the principal.
Yeah, absolutely. And how it really is still so embedded in our educational institutions and elsewhere, this punitive model. I mean, just the fact that we still use things like detention and suspension, even for little kids, and the fact that a lot of therapies out there, even therapies, working with parents to help them do things in the home, it's all geared around this same thing. And we may use different words for it and whatever, but really at the root, it's the same thing, right? Kids do well if they wanna, and if we're reinforcing the right things and giving unpleasant consequences for the wrong things, then this is gonna get better. But I think what so many of our listeners can relate to about this is that they know that this doesn't really make it better. Even if, as you said, you get some surface level compliance, or I refer to it as like the game of whack-a-mole, right? It's like you get this one thing taken care of. We have umpteen meetings and plans and all these things, and you get this one down and 3 more pop up over here because we've not actually solved the problem. We haven't looked at what the real issue is, and we haven't given the kid any additional skills or support in addressing that.
That is correct. Now, there are some people out there who take great pride in the fact that they don't punish, they only reward.
Right. Yeah.
Those two are cut from the exact same bolt of cloth.
Yeah.
But secondly, I have seen just as many kids lose their minds in failing to achieve the anticipated reward as I have seen kids lose their mind in the midst of being punished. I don't distinguish between those two. A lot of folks do. That is a false distinction. It's also archaic.
Yeah, and we know that it just is ineffective, especially when we look at the big picture of kids' lives. And I always say to people, I'm much less concerned about getting a kid to do thing A or thing B right now. I'm concerned about helping kids grow into being adults who know how to manage themselves, think about and solve problems that come up. That's what our goal should be, not just doing this target behavior or thing right now.
Correct. Plus, a lot of those behavior management programs, their primary focal point is just compliance. I want you to do what I say. Boy, do we miss a lot that way. The kid has no voice under those circumstances. We don't learn anything about the kid in terms of why the kid is having difficulty meeting that expectation. It's largely about power and control. We are not working together. We're not teammates. We're not partners. Instead, we're being adversarial, and it's completely unnecessary.
Well, and it also can be very damaging to the parent-child relationship, the teacher-child relationship, those relationships, which we know from everything about developmental psychology research, child development research, those relationships are the foundation for being able to regulate ourselves emotionally and behaviorally, being able to engage in, social interactions in an appropriate way. And yet we kind of throw those relationships under the bus with these more behavioral types of approaches, don't we?
That's a very good way to put it. Rewarding and punishing. There's people who try to make the case that rewarding and punishing enhances relationships. Not sure where you come up with that.
Yeah. So let's get into really your collaborative and proactive solutions model. And obviously we don't have time to get into all the details of it, but I do want, you've now set the stage for how and why we need to be looking at this differently. Let's talk about what CPS is, how it really is a different and more helpful model.
Well, there's basically two components to the model. The first thing we got to do is use an instrument that I developed called the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems to identify the information that's been missing. What are this kid's lagging skills? What are this kid's unsolved problems? People can find the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems on the website of my nonprofit, Lives in the Balance. I would say it takes about 45 to 50 minutes to complete it. The beauty of the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems is, as I've already mentioned, it, number one, helps us get the right lenses on. We've got to get the right lenses on with these kids. We lose a lot of kids because we've got the wrong lenses on. Now we've got to identify what we're going to be working on with the kid. Unsolved problems. What expectations is the kid having difficulty meeting? And then what the model basically does is once those unsolved problems are identified and once they're prioritized, because a lot of very behaviorally challenging kids have accumulated quite a number of unsolved problems over time. Got to prioritize, otherwise you're working on too many things at once, and then you'll end up solving no problems at all. Then you've got to decide how you want to solve those problems. And in the real world, I always say you have three options. In this model, you're only using two of them. In the real world, those three options are called plans A, B, and C. In this model, you're really only using B and C. Plan C is where you are setting aside a particular expectation, at least for now. Not because you're giving in, not because you're giving up, but because you're prioritizing. As I've already said, many kids have a lot of unsolved problems once we finally get around to identifying them. Can't solve them all at once. Plan C are the unsolved problems we have consciously, deliberately, and here's a big word, proactively decided, we're not working on this one right now. We got bigger fish to fry. That's plan C. Now, another beautiful thing about plan C besides prioritizing is that it's also very stabilizing. Any expectation we have removed for now won't set in motion a challenging episode because we aren't even expecting the kid to meet that expectation right now. Now, that rubs some people the wrong way, especially those who never want to give up even a fraction of the adult agenda. And also from people who think that have a very narrow definition of authority. They think authority is when you say jump and the kid says how high. What I tell people all the time is, boy, are you being an authority figure. When you decide that there are certain expectations, you're just going to remove for now. But Plan C is also useful because it also helps us think to ourselves, can this kid even meet this expectation right now? We put a lot of expectations on kids and cause a lot of challenging episodes on expectations they cannot even meet yet.
And it creates such tremendous amount of overwhelm, not just for the child, but for the adults around the child too. I think it's such a relief, actually, that idea of I can choose as the adult in the situation, I can choose to have this be a plan C because it takes it off the table as something that I need to feel overwhelmed or stressed about, that the kid does. And so I think that narrowing the field to really just focusing on certain things at a time is not only helpful for the child, I think it's incredibly helpful for reducing the stress and the anxiety of the parent or the adult. Absolutely.
A lot of classroom teachers breathe an enormous sigh of relief when you say to them, you know what, you don't even have to worry about that right now, right? You have not reduced your standards. You have not given up on those expectations. You've prioritized. That's different.
Yeah.
That leaves us with only two other plans, A and B. Both represent a way to solve a problem with a kid. There's just one massive difference between them. With plan A, you're solving the problem unilaterally. With plan B, you're solving the problem collaboratively. In this model, you're using plan B.
Right.
Now, I always like to reassure people, are we allergic to plan A in this model? No. If a kid is about to dart in front of a speeding car in a parking lot, you're not doing plan C. You're not saying, well, we got bigger fish to fry here. You're not doing plan B, it's too late. You're doing plan A. You yank on the kid's arm, you save his life. If he blows up, so be it. But if 3 weeks later, the kid has now darted in front of a speeding car an additional 15 times, and you've yanked an additional 15 times, yes, yanking is working at saving the kid's life. But no, yanking is not working at solving this problem. You're going to need a different plan. And that's either going to be plan C, where you're saying, I don't think we're ready for parking lots yet. Or plan B, where you are finding out what's making it so hard for this kid to meet the expectation of staying next to you in a parking lot and solving that problem together.
Yeah. Let's talk just a bit about the lagging and unsolved problems. Can you give a few examples of that, just for our listeners who are not familiar with that way of thinking about it? What are some of the things that assessment is looking at, or that we're thinking about when we think about the kinds of root level issues that kids are having?
Here are some lagging skills, and you'll notice that lagging skills are more general. Unsolved problems are more specific. Some of the lagging skills on the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems are things like difficulty shifting from one mindset or task to another, difficulty persisting on challenging or tedious tasks, difficulty expressing one's needs, thoughts, or concerns in words. Those are very general. Those are our lenses, right? That's the 10,000-foot view. Those lagging skills take the place of attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated limit testing. The unsolved problems are more specific. The unsolved problems are these specific expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting. Difficulty coming back into the classroom after recess. Difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Difficulty sitting next to Billy during circle time. Difficulty, those are school ones.
Yeah.
Home ones would be difficulty brushing teeth before going to bed at night. Difficulty turning off the Xbox to come in for dinner. Difficulty turning off the Xbox to go to bed at night. Difficulty waking up at 7 a.m. to go to school. Those are home unsolved problems. You can see that those are much more specific. The lagging skills give us our lenses. The unsolved problems tell us the unsolved problems that we're trying to solve with this kid.
Yeah, and I think it's such a more helpful way of looking at it, because out of that then can come some actual solutions or ways of working on that don't just get compliant behavior in those situations, but actually teach and develop the skills to handle those situations, but also so many more. And that's what I think just makes, in the big picture, makes so much more sense about an approach like this in a more behavioral or, reward and punishment kind of model. Every single thing has to be tackled, as a separate thing. It's like that game of whack-a-mole. Whereas with this, as we're developing those underlying skills, many things start to improve for the child as a result of that, beyond just the maybe one target that we're initially working on, right?
That is correct. It doesn't always work out that way, but yes, it is possible that by helping a kid solve the problem of difficulty coming back into the classroom after recess, we would also take a few giant steps forward in helping the kid come into school in the morning, or move from math to English, or you name it, right? So yes, by working on one, you are sometimes solving another. But the big difference here is that with reward and punishment programs, you are primarily focused on behavior. Behavior is just a signal. But the other thing to know about behavior is that it's late.
Yeah.
And a lot of the worst things we do to kids that, with the best of intentions, to quote unquote help them, are late. Restraining a kid is late. Putting a kid in a seclusion room is late. Detention's late. Suspension's late. Expulsion is late. Paddling is late. Timeout is late. Because behavior is late. And those things are all being done in response to behavior. What's early? The unsolved problems that are causing that behavior. If you identify those problems early and you solve those problems early, now you're in crisis prevention mode. And now you're not in crisis management mode anymore.
That proactive approach as opposed to that reactive approach.
Right.
And that's such a powerful shift for people to make, whether, we're talking about parents or people in a school setting or, wherever else, that shift from thinking about how do we get ahead of this? How can we help this child navigate this situation before it turns into the explosive behavior, the whatever is so important.
Now, to do that, we should probably go through the 3 steps of Plan B, because to do that, you're going to need information about what's making it hard for the kid to meet the expectation you're talking with him or her about. So Plan B consists of 3 steps. The first step is called the empathy step. Second step is called the define adult concern step. And the third step is called the invitation step. The names of the steps don't matter that much. The ingredients matter a lot. The main ingredient of the empathy step is information gathering. Gathering information from the kid about what's making it hard for the kid to meet the expectation we're talking with him or her about right now. As I always say, kids have information we badly need. Information about what's hard, information about what's getting the kid's way. If we do not get that information, we don't really know what's getting in the kid's way, and this problem is going to remain unsolved. We need info. The empathy step is where we're going to get it. Now, immediately after I say that, a lot of adults think, what if the kid won't talk to me? The kid isn't talking to you because of Plan A.
Right.
I'm not talking about Plan A. I'm talking about Plan B. Could take a while, but the kid is going to talk to you. You can gather that information. What if the kid is nonverbal? We do this with nonverbal kids all the time. It's not that nonverbal kids aren't communicating. It's that nonverbal kids aren't communicating through our preferred modality, spoken word. That's the empathy step. Without that information, this problem can't get solved because the kid's concerns are not going to get addressed if we don't know what those concerns are.
Can you give an example of, so thinking about something that might come up at home between a parent and child, can you just give our listeners an example of what that empathy step might sound like?
Sure. It starts with an introduction. The introduction starts with the words, I've noticed that, and ends with the words, what's up? In between, you are inserting an unsolved problem. I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to brush your teeth before going to bed at night. What's up? Now, this is a true story. I love telling this story. I was doing a podcast about a year ago, and the interviewer was telling me about his 3-year-old daughter who was having difficulty brushing her teeth before she went to bed at night. And he didn't do the empathy step. He thought he knew. And this is one of the biggest mistakes we adults make, right? We think we know already. So he thought it was the taste of the toothpaste. 15 different flavors of toothpaste later, she was still having difficulty brushing her teeth before she went to bed at night. So he finally did Plan B. And what did he learn? And this is why I always say, the empathy step is where you find out that what you thought was getting in the kid's way is not what was getting in the kid's way. Found out that when this was a 3-year-old daughter, by the way. So people think you can't do this with a 3-year-old. Yes, you can. It turns out that when he was brushing her teeth with the electric toothbrush, it was getting water all over her face. She didn't like it. So I said to him, well, now there's a concern that 15 different flavors of toothpaste would never address. The solution was that they put a towel around her face when he was brushing her teeth with the electric toothbrush. And then both concerns were addressed. She didn't want water getting sprayed on her face. He wanted to make sure that her teeth were clean and that she didn't get cavities. Did he give up any authority in doing that? No. Did he save a lot of time in doing it? Yes. That's what the empathy step sounds like. But we also then merged into the other two steps.
Yeah.
The define adult concern step is where the adult is entering his or her concern into consideration. And that usually is, why is it important that this expectation be met? And adult concerns usually fall into one or both of just two categories. How the unsolved problems affecting the kid, and or how the unsolved problems affecting other people. In the case of the kid with the teeth brushing, he didn't want to get cavities. That would be how it affects her. And maybe he didn't want to have to pay for those cavities, which would be how it affects him, right? The invitation starts with the words, I wonder if there's a way. Generically, what do you wonder if there's a way to do? Generically, you're wondering if there's a way to solve this problem. And you could say it that way. But if you say it that way, a lot of kids are going to look at you and say, what problem? So what you want to do instead is recap the concerns of both parties. Here's what it would have sounded like. I wonder if there's a way for us to make sure we don't get water all over your face when I'm brushing your teeth. And also make sure that your teeth get cleaned so you don't get cavities and I don't have to pay for them. You are then giving the kid the first crack at the solution. Do you have any ideas? Not because it's the kid's job to solve the problem. It's y'all's job to solve the problem. Y'all are partners, y'all are teammates, but it's very good strategy. It lets the kid know beyond a shadow of a doubt you're actually interested in his or her ideas. If the kid doesn't have any ideas, the adult will. And that's the process. And that, by the way, is the process on brushing your teeth with a 3-year-old. It is the exact same 3 steps with unsafe sex, illicit use of substances, truancy, you name it. 3 steps.
And what's so beautiful about that is it not only actually allows for the development of productive solutions, but it also builds this relationship of collaboration and trust that's so vitally important between kids and you know, the significant adults in their lives.
Totally.
Yeah. And I think it's important to mention because some people might be thinking, well, you know, this kid that I work with won't respond in that way, or, you know, my kid won't respond. This is a process. And especially, as you said, if plan A has been the plan, what the kid's experience has been with you as the parent or as the teacher or whoever, it's going to take some time to build that trust that you truly do want to think with them about this and handle these things in a different way, right?
It can take a while. There are definitely some kids who've had so much plan A in their life that it's going to take a while for them to trust you. But I got to tell you, being heard, finally, which is what's going on in the empathy step. By the way, I'm just reassure adults, being heard is also going on in the define adult concern step. That's where the adult is being heard. So the kid is not the only one being heard in this process. But being heard is actually very powerful. These are kids who've been wanting to have voice and wanting to have their concerns heard for a very long time. And I always tell people, listening is the purest form of empathy. So I actually, most of the plan Bs that I do with kids these days are with kids that I've never met. They don't trust me. And yet, empathy is still the purest, listening is still the purest form of empathy. And having voice is very powerful.
Do you find that one of the challenges for adults in shifting to this mode of approaching these things with kids, let's even talk about it just for parents, is this idea that I think is so ingrained in us, just in one way, shape, or form, about us needing to be in control, that authority piece. And if we involve the kid in the process of that, if we approach it more as a discussion, a collaborative problem solving sort of model, that somehow that means that we're not in charge or we're losing control. Do you find that that's a big barrier to this?
It is, but I also tell people that, first of all, control is a delusion. You don't have control anyways. The best you can shoot for is influence.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe even more importantly, generally speaking, I find the more control you shoot for, the less control you have.
Mm-hmm.
We adults would be way better off if we were shooting for influence instead of control. You don't have control. It's the impossible dream. But you can buy yourself influence, just not through the same methodology that you would if you were shooting for control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that idea of aiming for influence as opposed to control, because when we talk about these approaches, even in the clinic with some families, there's this sense on some people's part of, well, but I need to be the parent. I need to be in charge. They need to, do what I say when I say it. And so it is a shift for some people to this idea of, yes, we can meet the requirements. We can get your needs met and your child's needs met. This is a more productive way of doing that.
Yes, but I also think that that's a very narrow view of authority, a very narrow view of what it means to be a parent, a very narrow view of what it means to be an educator. I'd rather we use the word partner. You are this kid's partner in life. You want the kid to benefit from your experience, wisdom, and values, which is why you have those expectations in the first place. The problem is, if you go about trying to have influence unilaterally, you're not going to have very much influence, and you're not going to have control either. If you go about trying to have influence collaboratively, you're going to have influence.
Yeah, as you said, control, it's just the illusion of control anyway. I want to touch on something that you said that it occurs to me, some of our listeners may be thinking to themselves right now, and that is, you said the child can be nonverbal, there's lots of ways of approaching this, because I think some of our listeners, particularly if they have maybe a more impaired child, maybe a child with some cognitive impairment, or a child with more significant challenges, may think, oh, well, that's all nice if, you have a neurotypical kid, or, a kid who has, good communication skills or whatever, but that won't work for my child. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, don't sell your kid short. There's always a way. Your kid is communicating even if they're not using words. People communicate all the time with kids who are nonverbal and kids who are very quote unquote low functioning. We do it through pictures, we do it through sign, we do it through assistive technology. This is not impossible. And in fact, I got to tell you, those are the kids who I like working with the most these days, because they challenge my skills. We've got to get a little bit more creative. But we wouldn't want to sell those kids short, and we wouldn't count them out on being able to participate in solving the problems that affect their lives. When you count that kid out, you are left with nothing else except being unilateral. It just isn't so.
Yeah, I think that's just such an important point, because many parents are told, particularly if their child has a diagnosis of autism or a more significant, cognitive impairment, neurodevelopmental disorder, they're really told from early on, this more rote behavioral approach, this is what we have, this is what works, and this is what you need to do. And yet so many parents have misgivings about that. They're feeling like this doesn't really seem to be working, and yet they're told, no, this is what you do for those kids. That's why I wanted to touch on that, because what you're saying and what I say and others say is there are other options. That's not your only option if your child has that diagnosis.
There are other options, and those parents may have noticed already, and teachers, that the option that they were told was the only option often isn't working very well.
Yeah, absolutely. So helpful to just reframe this for people and to walk through what the approach looks like, and just plant the seed in people's mind for a different way of thinking about and handling these things. I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more about the work you're doing, the resources you have, this approach.
Well, there's books, obviously, but the website of my nonprofit, Lives in the Balance, which is lives, Lives, in the balance.org, is just filled with a massive amount of free resources to take them beyond what they've just heard. It would take months to get through all of the free resources on that website. That's the first place that I would start.
Absolutely. And it is such a wealth of information. Every time I go to the website, there's new things up there. So many, whether it's things to listen to or watch or download, just a really great variety of things, and really want to encourage people to check that out. And then obviously the books, I've got my whole collection here, and the others. So just such wonderful resources, whether you're a parent listening or maybe a family member, or if you are one of the professionals who listens to the show and is working with kids in schools and therapy settings, childcare assistants, all of those, anybody who is spending time with kids can benefit from these resources and from this approach. So I can't thank you enough for being here with us today. Such a helpful conversation.
Thank you. And I want to make sure that we wish everyone to stay safe and be well.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Better Behavior Show. We'll catch you back here next week.